Hello, my dearest friends, and welcome back to the Strong Stoic Podcast. I'm your host, Brandon Tumblin. My guest today is Jeremy Sherman. Jeremy is a researcher and writer studying the origins of life. Ooh, I know. He's also a bit of a philosopher. He describes himself as half Stoic, which is good enough for me. He's written 2 books, Neither Ghost Nor Machine, where he talks about the origins of life that he works on, and also a second book called What's Up with Assholes. I love the name. Where he discusses why people are jerks and how not to be one yourself. So he's really a fun guy to talk to. He can draw from multiple domains, philosophy and his research as a scientist, and he has a very colorful vocabulary as well. I hope you enjoy it. Hello, Jeremy. Welcome to the show, man. I'm so excited to talk to you today. How's your day in California?
It's fabulous, and it's great to talk with you. It's great to be on your show. Love it.
Yeah, I'm excited to have you. So because you have a very one of your areas of focus intellectually is a very interesting one that I like, and that's on jerks/assholes. So you actually wrote a book, What's Up with Assholes? Did I get that right?
Yeah, though I may end up changing the name. But anyway, yes, What's Up with Assholes is the current name. It's already out as a podcast or as a pod class. It's like a 14-episode class, advanced psychoproctology for beginners. So it's totally accessible, but it's an attempt to be really rigorous about the question, how would you diagnose someone? Everybody diagnoses buttheads subjectively. Anybody who butts heads with you is a butthead. But so it's an attempt to really figure out, okay, what makes someone a butthead? What goes on with the diagnosis there, and also how do you treat and prevent them? That is, how do you deal with a-holes, and how do you prevent people from becoming them? So I wrote it during the whole first phase of COVID, and it's out as a pod class already for free, and it'll be out as a book soon.
Yeah, well, I thought it was a very interesting topic because as a recovering asshole myself, I think it's one we all need to read, and it's so interesting too because, and we talked about this a little bit when we spoke privately, but being an asshole feels good, right? Like,
Really good. Yeah.
if you're not the asshole, if you're on the outside and you're seeing someone be an
yeah.
asshole, it's like that guy's an asshole. But like when you're the guy, it feels so good. It feels great to be a jerk.
It's fabulous if you can get away with it. So a lot of it is how to make it so people can't get away with it.
Right.
I should also say that I was an asshole too in my own way. And by the way, I should make clear that I cannot rule out the possibility that I'm an asshole now. That is, the heart of not being an asshole is tolerating some self-doubt. At least from my perspective. So if you don't want to be an asshole, expect some anxiety. And so it's probably a good symptom that both of us, or at least it's a good symptom. If you wonder whether you're still an asshole, that's probably evidence that you're not one, but or at least hints in that direction. But we were probably opposite kinds of assholes. I would have probably found you an intimidating asshole. I was a polite, nice, love is the answer asshole. You can be an asshole all sorts of different ways. And I was kind of a know-it-all that love was the answer and that we all just have to get along with each other and drop our egos. And that's its own version of asshole. You can enter the asshole detours to assholia by any number path, and I happen to take the more pacifist style of path. A kind of a smug Buddhist asshole was the kind I was more likely to be.
Yeah, I was basically the if you did something to piss me off, you meant it, and I'm never going to talk to you again. That was the kind of asshole I was as a younger person.
Never going to talk to you again. It wasn't, you didn't go at them fiercely? You didn't?
No, it wasn't so much. I wasn't so aggressive with it. I just, well, part of it I think is because I'm introverted. So I never
really?
did need a lot of friends. So if I had a couple friends growing up, I'm like, I'm okay. And I have a limit, right? With social interactions, my fuel tank goes dry pretty quick. And so, if one of my friends did something or someone I knew I just met and they did something, and, I would always take it the wrong way. And I would always be like, okay, well, that's it. Because I didn't feel like I needed a lot of friends, and I honestly, I still don't, being so introverted. I just, most of my time I like to refill my tank just by reading or being alone, and so it's a weird problem to have.
That's interesting. I hadn't understood that. Yeah, there's, once again, various ways to be an asshole. Some people take revenge tenfold. Some people walk away. and write people off. And some people engage in what I have called narcissism, which is the narcissism of saying that's not nice about anything that disappoints us, which is, another version of translating all disappointments into claims that someone must have violated a moral imperative. And that was closer to my style back then, and sobered up on it a bit. But the time I'm referring to in my life was when I was living on, you could say, a rather stoic, living within a rather stoic community. We didn't tout ourselves as Stoics, but I lived on the world's largest hippie commune, and we were total pacifists. It was 1,400 members, but there was something Stoic about it. It was great for me because it was kind of like a boot camp for a guy who'd otherwise lived a pretty cushy life. The rule was, if someone asked you to do something, a chore or anything like that, your answer simply was yes, and you got up and did it. It didn't get cultish that way. It was really quite communal and actually in many ways matriarchal. But that is, the women had a lot of power there. You don't cross the women there, or you get, that was bad news. But there was something fundamentally Stoic about it, and at the same time, I would say I outgrew it, or its answers became the springboards to my next questions, the research I've gone on to do for the last many years. And some of that was a sobering up about what I'll call robo-envy. So I would say that Stoicism has a bit of robo-envy about it. Robo-envy would be the assumption that emotions are a distraction, a counterproductive distraction, and that we would be best off following rational, logical algorithms, and being more like robots. And also the ideal, why you'd want robo-envy, is that you could reprogram yourself just like that. And you could reprogram other people just like that. There's a whole lot of that in the self-help world. Just do this, just start thinking this. And there's a little bit of that at the heart of Stoicism. The assumption that can be misunderstood and probably has many interpretations, that you can't change many things in your environment, amen to that, but you can change how you respond. Now, by now, I'm not as convinced that I could change everything about my responses. I'm not omnipotent and I'm not impotent. I'm somnipotent. I have some power. And I'm trying to guess where I have some power. And that means I'm not sure what I can and can't change in my environment. And I'm not sure what I can and can't change within myself.
Yeah, I've received a lot of pushback on that idea, because I've always, one of the first things you learn as a baby Stoic is the dichotomy of control. And this is a very, very powerful idea. And simply put, things are either within your control or not within your control. And that's how people think about it. They literally think about it. It's either in my control or it's not within my control. And the extreme of that, which I've seen through engaging with modern Stoics, is that if it's not 100% within your control, then it's not within your control. So it's either it's 0 or 100. And I had Kai Whiting on, who's a semi-famous Stoic, and we spoke about this as well. Is that it's not so much black and white; it's gray, right? And I see like some baby Stoics that sort of make posts, and they say, you have to focus on the things that you can only 100%, and they use that 100% control over, and they say, oh, your attitude and your response and how you feel. And it's like, well, you don't actually have 100% control. No. What do you have 100% control over in your life? Like, probably nothing, right? Like your attitude, you can get better at it over time, but 100%, absolutely not.
Yeah,
how you respond to things, you have emotional responses all the time. Can you get better at fighting them rationally? Yes. 100%? No.
No.
Right?
No, that's a great point. So what I am most fundamentally these days, and I use fundamental ironically, is fallibilism. Fallibilism is an undersung quality or descriptor in philosophy, from my perspective. It's simply the recognition that all responses are guesses. That is, you never reach 100% certainty on anything. It's very much different from saying, that any guess is as good as any other. No, you definitely can make better and worse guesses, but you cannot reach 100% certainty about anything. Um, that's the ultimate limitation on total control or total lack of control. Um, one way to talk about it is that obviously, if you just look back over your life, there were things that were seemingly significant that proved insignificant, and things that were seemingly insignificant that proved significant. And this is not just about the limitations of humans. It's not just that humans are imperfect. I take it back all the way, since I do origins of life research, which gets me into physics and all of that. It's much more fundamental than that. That is, there are switchbacks in physics where things are going in one direction and then they turn around and go in other directions.
You mean evolutionarily?
No, we're talking before evolution. We're talking about, you could say that there's the dissipation of order, the second law of thermodynamics, and yet there are also reversals. So a whirlpool, for example, is a reversal of that, where in a locus there is increased order when there is decreased order outside of it. Now, none of that matters. That is, in physics, there's no mattering, nothing matters. But once you get organisms that are trying to persist, they have to try and track the reversals in their environments. That's what responsiveness is. You know, the last thing you want to do is be open to receive food that is vulnerable to receive food when there's no food available, or closed when there is food available. So those kinds of tough judgment calls show up at the origins of life. That's what we mean by responsiveness. It's doing different things in different situations. But we can only guess. There will be times when you're opened when you should be closed, and times when you should be closed when you're closed when you should be open. And that guesswork is built right into the struggle for existence. You know, so Yoda was just flat out wrong. There's nothing but try. That is the idea. You know, yes, in retrospect, you can say that something either was done or not done, but in prospect, that is, as we're predicting forward, we're guessing. Life is a trial and error process, and that means we're all trying. Which means this idea that you know for certain what you can control 100% and what you can't. That's an idealization. It's a fine thing to strive for as long as you recognize that is bullshit. You could never get there. That's not possible. And that's also where the arrogance comes in, is that someone could cloak themselves in the bravado of Stoicism and claim that they now are authorities on what can and can't change, and double down on it and triple down on it. And then you end up with the Stoic version of asshole. And like I said earlier on, there's lots of versions of asshole, but that would be the Stoic one.
You know? Of course. Yeah. And you know, I've been thinking about this lately, sort of so I love evolution. Like I'm a big student of evolution, and I read a lot of neuroscience, and I'm very fascinated about how we have this, you know, sort of like the three-part brain system. And I know my terminology is probably not completely accurate, but you know, you have the reptilian part of your brain, which is like instinctual. Then you have your mammalian part of the brain, which is like love and family, and then we have the neocortex. And I'm always fascinated. I've always been fascinated with evolution and sort of how that has dictated our current, I would say, even our current need for philosophy. And this is something that maybe I'd like to poke your brain a little bit at, like because you studied origins of life, and like, what do you see, like, at what point in evolution do you think the need for philosophy, and it doesn't have to be Stoicism, it can be any philosophy, even religion, right?
Yeah,
But
no,
at what point did it become a necessity for us for survival? Because it seems to be that way now, right?
Well, so the point, I would argue, is pretty straightforward. It's the acquisition of language. That is, this is what I think, between language and technology, which both feed on each other, we are radically different from other organisms, and so it's a fundamental difference in how we interact with the world. So a lot of the work, I've been collaborating for 25 years with this guy. He was at Harvard when I met him. He was willing to get on my PhD committee, even though it wasn't Harvard. Then he happened to move to Berkeley, where I live now, and we've been jamming for 25 years. He's a Harvard neuroscientist and biological anthropologist, and his first 20 years were spent explaining the evolution and nature of language, or what we call symbol competency. Symbols are really different from what other organisms deal with. You know, other organisms deal with what we call icons and indexes. So an icon is a similarity, and obviously humans deal with these too. For example, we talked the other day. You are to the Brandon I'm seeing today is iconic of the guy I was talking to last week. That's why I assume that you are the same person. That is, you have features in common. That's iconicity. All animals can deal with that in some way or another. All organisms can. Indexicality may be best represented by Pavlov's dog, which is where you've got something that is correlated in time and space. So a bell rings and then food is served. So animals are actually quite adept at iconicity, and this is all the way down to insects and even below. Symbols are radically different. Symbols are a collection of socially held arbitrary signs that can be compiled into sentences to describe anything real or imaginary. And they make a radical difference to how we interact. So a simple example would be if you just compared what a dog could worry about before going to sleep to what a human can worry about. We have vastly more real and imaginary threats and missed opportunities for us to be anxious about, idealizations to aspire to, all of that stuff. So we really see philosophy coming out. You know, the original uses of written symbols were basically packing slips. Cuneiform was for packing, for shipments. It's actually in your line of work. The other time, the rest of your time. That's what cuneiform. That's what language came up for on the Nile. And then they started to figure out, wait, actually, we can go to a phonetic language, and then we can talk across different tribes. We can translate. And also with phonetics, you were able to translate everything that was already verbally happening in all the tribal rituals and religions. And only then do you get these dialogues about basically the ultimate packing slip. Who the hell are we? Where did we come from? What is this about? What's it for? All of those questions, I think, are a result of us having language. So you could say it starts in Asia, maybe in the 4,000, 5,000 years ago. The axial age would be when we really see it begin to flourish.
Yeah, that's fascinating, eh? So basically, you think that it's like the language is a reflection of our higher cognitive abilities, in a sense, which I suppose is really
in a way. Yeah, though, and this ties back in. I happened to write an article last week. I don't spend much time on the triune brain concept. That's not something, for example, that would get endorsed by the neuroscientists I work with. I mean, there's elements of it, but it's not as simple as that.
Right. Yeah, for sure.
But here's one way to think about it. Organisms have to fit their environments. And I want to suggest that I have to fit, or humans have to fit, three environments. One is the social environment. That is, I have to get along with others, which I'm going to say I have to go along with what's already liked within my community. More fundamentally, I have to get along with reality itself, that which doesn't change no matter what anybody's opinion about it is. I'm going to call that the likely story. So there's the pursuit of the likely story, what's true. There's the pursuit of the like story, what's socially popular. And the third one is the pursuit of likability for myself. And this is where Stoicism, I think, short sells what's going on emotionally for us. And actually, a lot of neuroscience has gotten really interested in this question. I got to feel comfortable in my own skin. Yeah, I got to deal with society, and I also got to deal with reality. But most pressing, I have to feel comfortable in my own skin. I am, in effect, my conceptual world, the world of my language, is going to end up being tuned to what keeps me feeling okay, good, great. And that I think is true for all of us. So we're actually adapting in three different realms. Uh, trying to get along with reality, trying to get along with other people, trying to get along with ourselves. And that's an interesting collection. And it's kind of oversimplified out of some versions of Stoicism. Like you should just get over yourself. And I just don't think, I think that if we try to bury that side of us that needs to feel good about ourselves, we won't succeed. We'll end up stunting our growth on managing how we get along with our emotional selves.
No, I would agree as well. Because it's basically you need positive emotion. Like I've always thought, philosophically speaking, you can guarantee when you were born that you were going to have a lot of negative emotion in life. Like life is very tragic, right? And you're going to have that. You have to work for the positive emotion. That doesn't just fall on your doorsteps. And so, one of the things you have to do, and one of the things that philosophy is good for, is making sure that you can make an actual better life for yourself, and that is part of that. So those three categories, I'm going to summarize the categories: how I feel about
Yeah,
myself.
I have to fit. To comfort in your own skin is probably the simplest way to
Right.
describe that one. There's an imperative to feel comfort in your own skin.
Right. Yes. Feeling good with who I am, feeling good with my relationship to the world around me, society,
Feeling a belonging, and
a
these are
feeling of
real
belonging. Yep.
practical. They are practical things. That is too much isolation, and you run some risks.
Absolutely.
So, and also we seek status for any number of reasons, many of them bogus. That is, I discovered at 40 that I was seeking status no, 55. I realized, wait, I'm seeking status I don't actually need anymore. Um, uh, and that actually I could pay more attention to reality if I was less distracted by pleasing audiences or getting likes. So, but yes, there is something. So there's the social, there's the personal, and then there's this one that's the most real of all, which is reality itself. Is
Right.
I have to get along with reality.
So I never thought about this, to be honest, but this is really fascinating to me. So how I feel in my own skin, my sense of belonging, and how and reality. And so I imagine if we think about this in terms of the value of a particular philosophy, the best philosophy would be in line with all of those. The best philosophy would maximize how you feel in your own skin, and also your social, how you belong in a social environment, and also is in line with reality and the truth.
Well, yes, I think it's a slightly more complicated than that by a little bit. So let me just
Yep.
frame it up this way, which is that in the long run, getting along with reality matters most. That is,
Yes.
I
Yes.
remain this organism that has to struggle for my existence every day. I have to find real opportunities. I can't get too lost in fantasy, but that's the long term. In the short term, feeling comfort in my own skin is the most pressing.
Right.
That you threaten me and I'll feel it, and that'll cost me, and I'll start panicking and scrambling. In between, the social is a strange intermediator. It can either represent reality to us, like when a parent, watches teaches kids to watch out not to fall off cliffs, but also you can be born into a family, into a society that is completely defying reality and is just in the self-flattery game. So which is it? It represents either one to us. And I think that in the long run, the best philosophies will be. So here's how I'd frame it: is I remember let's set aside society for a minute. I'm going to talk about the liked story, the things that I like to hear because they make me feel good, and the likely story, which I would argue is the scientific guesses. That is, science doesn't come up with proofs; it just comes up with guesses. But its method is intriguing, and you just look around you, it has yielded us a whole lot more evidence about what's going on in reality and a whole lot more functional tools. So getting along with reality is really important. So the liked and the likely story. Now, I work with all sorts of researchers, and I would distinguish between two kinds of researchers. Some researchers are trying to maximize the likeliness of their liked story. That if they had an epiphany, they had a breakthrough that made them feel real comfortable in their skins, And they didn't think of it that way. I thought they had a realization. They had seen truth, like Plato's cave, sort of. And now what they're trying to do is they're trying to tack weld some reality onto it, some realism onto it. So this would be the quantum physics proves that love is the answer, would be an example of this kind of approach. I have friends who are deep into this kind of approach. They basically start with their mission or their advocacy, what they'd like the world to believe, and they gild it. They ornament it with scientific evidence. I want to take and I also think there's a lot to be said for this approach. That is, we've got to, whatever science we come up with, it can't be too negative or else people won't buy it. But my approach is different. I'm trying to maximize the likability of the likely story. That is, I happen to come into this research community after having just dumped the ideologies or philosophies that I had embraced and basically ornamented with myself. I had come into it at a time when I wasn't particularly sure how things worked. And I ended up working with some nerds who were remarkably dry, stoic about this stuff. They were, they wanted to get their advocacy out of the way to see what was happening. They were, in this sense, true scientists. I think of science as to get what you want, set aside what you want long enough to see what is. And then, better informed, you'll be better able to get what you want. So I think of science as that attempt to get out from under your own appetites. Or as some Buddhists said, truth waits for eyes unclouded by longing. So I ended up working with some nerds like that, but I do most of my writing in accessible forms. I'm a pop writer. I'm not an academic writer. Today I'm working on an academic article, but it's not where I mostly write. I write memes. I write podcasts. I do, I try to make it accessible. So, so this business for me is trying to maximize the likability of the likely story. That would be
that's interesting. Because, and you're absolutely right, because I think what came to mind there is that the truth isn't always pretty. Reality isn't always pretty. And so, and you also have more dimensions to this as well, because you have those three: social, how I feel, and reality. And that you have that now, but you also have another dimension, which is time. So in the future, so really, maybe the better way of saying it is that the best philosophy will maximize those over time, not just now, because you can do things now, obviously pleasure seeking, that's going to make your life miserable in 5 years, or you can do things that are difficult, that don't make you feel good right now, but are going to make your life better in 5 years.
Right. But that's a harder pill to swallow. And in a way, that's why I'm trying to maximize the realism. And every fool will say that they're trying to that their stuff is realistic. So I have to face into the fact that I could just be another ass clown who's doing that, who says I'm realistic.
Their reality is their reality.
Because these days you get so much credibility by claiming that your stuff is scientific. It's incredible how many that while I was writing the psychoproctology book, I was cultivating conversations with trolls, and I was really surprised by how many of them came out of the box. Like, before we even started talking, they said that they were master critical thinkers. And it was just clear to me as the conversations went on, they had no fucking clue what critical thinking was. They just knew that it was bling that all the cool kids were wearing. So right. Sure. And that whatever their minister or their guru had said they were critical thinkers, so they must be. So the same happens with realism, that as everybody will claim to be a realist, it takes real work to try and figure out what realism would be. And that's what my PhD's in. And just because I have a PhD in it doesn't mean that I'm right about it. Mm-hmm. But I certainly have fussed a lot over what it would mean to be realistic. My PhD's in what they call evolutionary epistemology, which is a $10 word, but basically what it means is organisms been trying to fit reality for a long time. That is, their interpretations of reality. These are preconceptual. This is animals that can't think, or trees even. They have to fit reality. That epistemology means basically how to shop among interpretations.
Right.
So evolutionary epistemology is assuming that adaptations, that knowledge, as we humans think about it, is the language version of adaptations. We're all
Now,
still adapting.
now, do you think do you think we can even handle the ultimate truth or or reality?
I'm glad
Because
you asked it.
Nietzsche
Hell
didn't
no.
think so, right?
No, no, I
He
don't think
seemed
so.
to
No.
think that I think it was Nietzsche. He thought that the value of a person was as much truth as you can handle. The more truth you could actually handle, the better a person you are. Because it seems like when you learn a horrible truth, or let's just say a truth, but a lot of them are quite horrible. It's like you lose a piece of yourself, right? Like your innocence dies. Like as a child, I still remember the
Yeah,
first time
yeah,
I learned about death. Like I remember my mother sitting me down and being like, like you're gonna die someday. And for me, that was like really the awakening of my consciousness, right?
yeah,
It was like,
yeah,
oh wow, like I'm
yeah.
mortal. And I remember trying to sleep that night just terrified, but it's such a horrible truth. But and it takes away from you and also gives a lot back as well. And
Yeah,
so
though, yes. So there's a whole field of research that I've gotten deep into on exactly that. So this is one of the ways in which language makes us the anxious bunnies we are. Um, we are the first creature that can foresee in detail our inevitable deaths. I mean, and that once again, that's a product of language. And a guy named Ernest Becker wrote a Pulitzer Prize-winning book on the subject called "The Denial of Death," in which he argues that um, it makes us really anxious and makes us gravitate towards what he called immortality projects. And then some buddies, some research psychologists who I know, mostly through this work, they got interested in, they had me come out and keynote speak at one of their conferences because I was associated with this whole evolution of language approach. Um, these guys coined they developed a research field called terror management theory, and it's all about it's this fabulous research that demonstrates that people really dig in their heels on whatever values they claim to embrace. If you confront them, if you prime them on their deaths.
right,
So it's been really central to my work, and I also think I would argue it goes beyond just your own immortality. That is, every little death, every little disappointment is almost a reminder of your death, and we would rage against that dying of the light. So this is really central, and it's sobering. Um, and and back to the question of can we? So back to the Nietzsche question, Nietzsche quote. Um, he was he contributed to he didn't mean to necessarily, but there's a whole lot of assholes who read Nietzsche and decided that they were the Ubermensches, the supermen, and claimed that they were realists and all of that. I think it's a little more complicated than he described. Here's an example. If you happen to have a relatively calm and philosophical disposition, it's going to freak you out less. That life's disappointments might freak you out less. That is, we cannot tell, we're not the same. People have internal weather that's so intense that they freak out over little things. It's really hard to tell who is willing to face the most reality. And then on top of that, there's circumstantial differences. So people will often describe me, they'll compliment me by saying, "You're so brave to talk about this stuff." No, I'm not brave. I'm incredibly safe.
mm-hmm,
I happen to have money and live in
mm-hmm.
Northern California and just be, it's a cushy life. And I don't get to take any credit for how much realism I might be able to muster. I mean, I know people who live a life as padded as mine and can't face any realism at all, but no, it's not to my credit. I'm just safe.
Right.
The very big difference.
Yeah, it's
So
interesting because if there's nothing to be afraid of, or if you're not afraid, you can't really be brave, can you? Like if because people sometimes people say the same thing about some of the things I talk about, and it's like, oh, you must be so brave. It's like, well, no, I think I'm just missing a piece of my brain that tells me not to talk about things. So it's like it's not really brave if there's no fear, is there? Bravery is
well,
is
yeah,
becoming fear.
but yes, but I think the points are both valid and a little different.
Hmm.
Um, there are people who lack fear and are really in danger as a result.
Of course,
There
fear
are
is
people
useful.
who can cut themselves and not feel any pain. And these people tend to live short, accident-prone lives. So it's not quite that. I think what I'm trying to get at is this. I say brave things to trolls at safe distances. If they were actually gunning for me and my kids, yeah, it would be a different challenge. So I have to face that. So I don't want to pretend that I'm brave just because I can be brave at a distance with words. I spent my life cultivating words, and so I have to appreciate that, because taking down a-holes is really dangerous work.
Yeah.
Um, uh, they've designed it that way. So no, I don't consider myself a master of that. But I want to get back to something you were talking about earlier. Can
Yep,
we
sure.
handle reality? I think we have to be realistic about how unrealistic we have to be. Human life is just way too much. And so I've been very interested in, um, I operate on the assumption that escapism is unescapable, that a human couldn't survive if they faced it all. And so while I try to be realistic, I'm as delusional as the next person. I'm just trying to figure out how to engage in what I'll call optimal illusion, how to kid myself in ways that help more than harm,
Right.
help me more than, but also help others more than harm others. And so that's become a whole focus for me. It's the central concept in asshole prevention. That is, we need ways to vent our asshole, know-it-all, fake infallibility, playing God sides of ourselves. We need places to play out our bravado, but to do it safely is the real interest for me.
So you think
And
it's
I think,
unavoidable to be? You think the fundamental nature of being an asshole is common among humans, and you think it's unavoidable to some extent? We just have to learn how to fuel. I guess.
well, yeah, that may be slightly bolder than I'd say it, but if you look at most kids, they need some civilizing to get the,
Yeah.
they that is, there are reasons why, well, like we said, it's not only fun, but it's also adaptive. There is something to being, in the give and take. If you can find a way to take a little more than you give, it will be to your adaptive advantage. I mean, one of the paradoxes of it all is that assholes are highly evolved by Darwinian standards, not by human standards, not by humanist standards, but they are. When you think about life, the overarching game in life, it's how to maximize biological reproductive success, which means you have to be alive and flourishing yourself and
Right.
seeing to your offspring. Well, what does a tyrant do? That's what they do. So in a way, it's the pre-linguistic. Once you've got language, once again, you get philosophy. You also recognize that there are other humans. So you gain theory of mind. You gain the capacity to recognize, oh, it ain't just me. Well, you couldn't fault a bug for trying to proliferate,
Mm-hmm.
or take over things. You can't fault eucalyptus trees for taking over fertile ground. But with humans, there's another element to it. We can empathize and feel compassion and do things charitably as a result of having language that other organisms can't. So that's why we're humanists. We're not just animalists. But you do get assholes who are, they have the predatory quality of a super predator in the animal world,
Yeah.
combined with the self-rationalizing BS made possible by language. And they're terrifying. I actually think if anything's going to extinguish us as a species, it's them.
Well, it's funny
Um,
you say that because I worked with such a guy, and he was an asshole, and he was one of these guys. He was a contractor actually, and he would come in, and basically when shit was going bad, they would bring this guy in, and so we'd know like months in advance. Okay, this guy's coming in again, and everyone would be talking about it, right? It's like, oh, he's an asshole, but he gets shit done. Like the projects move really fast when he's here, but god damn it, he's an asshole. I hate dealing with him, and it was so interesting because you're absolutely right. Like that, evolutionarily speaking, like that probably is like the best thing to be, because they're selfish in a way. They don't really care about outside of who's in their group. and they had this particular guy, he had a couple underlings, and he would always pick out one, maybe two people that was like, I'm gonna raise you to be an asshole just like me kind of thing. Everyone else was fair game. He would rip you apart. And and it was worse than that, because you can be an asshole, but when you're an asshole and you're good at your job and you're really intelligent, that's a very dangerous combination, because
Yeah,
now you can't bullshit them, right? Now they're going to rip you apart. They're going to be an asshole about it, right?
right. So, and yet, so that's the most adaptive in the short term. You get things done. What
Right.
things you get done becomes the question then. So that is, there's a paradoxical quality to a tyrant who takes over the world and then nukes it. That is not good for their biological reproductive success.
Which is
Um,
why this guy was a contractor and not a regular employee. You bring him in when shit's bad, but you don't want him here long term, because he's bad
right,
for morale. He's
right,
bad for the
right.
long
And
term
I
growth.
end working in this field. I end up dealing with a lot of people who would diagnose their exes as a-holes, and
I'm sure.
and one of the evolutionary paradoxes we're all dealing with is, or not all of us, but many of us are dealing with, is if you're a vulnerable party, let's say a woman, and you want to have a guard dog of a husband, but there's a problem there, which is you bring a guard dog into the house to protect you from the outside world. There's a chance that that guard dog is going to be barking at you all day, and that's often the case. That is, you'll end up with a partner who will who will attack you. They're not just serving you; they're also attacking you. Better there's a saying in politics here: better to have them inside the tent pissing out than outside the tent pissing in.
Right.
Um, but again, it's not always true. That is, you can bring in someone. Stalin was an example of this. He was
Yeah.
brought in as like the contractor you described, and pretty
Yeah.
soon he decimated the party. I mean, just single-handedly, deliberately, methodically tearing apart until there was nothing left but his dominance.
So
So
how did we get past the how did the assholes get past the tribes? Because like when we were in tribes, hunter gatherer days, we're
yeah,
in pretty small groups, and and that's the famous Dunbar's number. How many people?
yeah,
About
yeah.
150. And like, I've had it described to me through evolutionary biologists that the best hunter wasn't the best hunter. It was the best hunter who was also kind and who was willing to share. Because the best hunter could kill a deer or mammoth or whatever, and then he would have that for himself, and that's fine. But if he doesn't get lucky next year, and he doesn't share it with everyone this year, no one's going to give him any of their meat in the following year. And so it's good today because I get to eat all this mammoth, but in a year it's not going to be so good for me. So like, I don't know. Have you ever thought about that? How
Sure,
did
yeah.
the assholes get past those tribal days? Because it was so small, right? It's like a community.
Yeah, but overpowering people was not necessarily that difficult. So, first of all, uh, 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 Terry Deacon, the guy who wrote this book called The Symbolic Species, who's a guy who I work with, um, he makes the argument that symbolic capacity actually came along to regulate the flow of resources. That is, we had to hunt originally in groups, and then there was a question about how we allocated the meat that was collected. So we had to hunt in troops because hyenas and lions were right there on the scene when we were first eating. When we were basically scavengers, going for the bone marrow and all of that. Once we figured out how to break open bones with rocks that other animals could get at, but you couldn't have the females at the hunt site. So the men would go out in troops and they would have to go home and provision their partners. Now, this is just a speculation. Deacon doesn't swear by it, but it is a speculation about how we ended up with a symbolic capacity. It wouldn't have first shown up as language. It would have been a few ritual features. And he argues that marriage would have been one of the first ones because of what we call in evolutionary biology, mother's baby, father's maybe. We always know who the mother is. We don't always know who the father is. And it is bad for your biological reproductive success to be provisioning other people's offspring. So, so there were early ways of coordinating to keep down the kind of assholery where someone would end up making babies that they forced others to provision. So that might have been some a place where symbolism first showed up, symbols, including language and all of that. It would have been rituals that basically say, I will be provisioning this person, you stay away from her, you can't impregnate her, that kind of thing, like a marriage vow. Okay, but back to your question, I don't get the feeling that, well, one argument is that when we were hunter-gatherers, there was not as much of a potential to accumulate wealth because you had to carry it around.
Right.
And once we became sedentary about 9,000 years ago, agricultural, then you really start to see inequality grow. And it's not hard to see why. For all the reasons, it's not hard to see it now. And actually, Stoicism plays into this in an interesting way. That is, if someone bosses you around, if someone claims more assertive power over you than you have, they're basically convincing you that there's no escaping this. So this is something you cannot change. Think about it, take it or leave it. What is it leaving out? Fight back against it. There's all sorts of ways of saying this, but when they say deal with it, you don't get to respond by saying I am, by fighting you. No, you deal with it means suck up. And there is something about the history of Stoicism when it came about during an authoritarian takeover that does parallel in a way what we see these days in society. There's a lot of talk about how self-help and mindfulness has become a way of mollifying or quieting unrest within the employees. Basically, bohica, bend over, here it comes again. It's just like that kind of approach. You can see why it would be parallel. So that's an interesting way that Stoicism can become a way to feel noble for caving into assholes.
Interesting.
And I don't mean, look, I said this earlier, I have never met a philosophy that cannot be corrupted.
Yeah.
Including anything I come up with. That is, they all, the ego can find a use for any of these things, and I don't even mean ego as a bad thing. We've all got egos, but at least to keep an eye on the ways in which they tend to get subverted and turned to other purposes. Once you come up with anything that sounds virtuous, it is going to be manipulated into a format that makes it a vice.
Yes.
As soon as you make a word sound lofty, people will strip it of its original meaning, assign it to whatever they want to have sound lofty, and flip it around. So yet another one of life's disappointments.
Yeah, well, I was into Stoicism way before it was popular, and back when, and it started to become popular, I guess, with Ryan Holiday's books, The Daily Stoic and all that stuff. And so I started to see I came from, at the time when I started getting into sort of modern Stoic groups and everything, I was a little aware of ideologies. I was freshly read on Soviet Russia. I was freshly read on, the Christianity, obviously, which we all know about, which some people in Christianity are ideologically possessed. And it sort of blew my mind when I came into Stoicism, modern Stoicism, so to speak, that we suffered from it as well. Stoicism as a group can suffer from ideological possession. And I've been very, very critical of Stoicism in many regards. And when I have a guest on, I always try and bring it up and sort of what the criticisms are, what the critiques are, because you're absolutely right. Like, whenever you have a philosophy, you can absolutely be sure that people are going to take that, and they might not do it consciously, but they can definitely use it in a way that's against the fundamental values. And what I've been thinking about lately is that because philosophies have sort of evolved with humans, I've thought about a philosophy sort of like a human body. Like a human body today, if me and you were to sit down and design a human body, it wouldn't be the way we are right now. It's not perfect. We have all these evolutionary things that have sort of died out. We no longer have the need for, or so on. And a philosophy is the same way. It's evolved over time, literally with us. And so, basically what I'm trying to say is that over time it's evolved with us, and there's all these underlying ideas and implicit ideas within it. and we have to make sure that we're actually critically thinking through the philosophy and not just taking it at face value, because well, for one, it needs to be updated because things change, and we need to update it. But really, because if you just take things at face value, you're not critically thinking at all. And there is certainly danger with ideological possession. And what I challenge Stoics with is, if you say Marcus Aurelius said this, so clearly it's true, that's no different than saying God said this, so clearly it's
Yeah,
true.
yeah, yeah. Um, yeah, that's pretty central in my work. So remember, I was talking about how there are reversals in physics. There's
Yes.
reversals in steroids in a symbolic species like us. That is, we can flip things around um, so many different ways. So I'm operating on the assumption that the bedrock in physical chemistry pulls the rug out from under itself a lot, but that we do it in spades. So that's why I'm a fallibilist. So fallibilist will not subscribe to the assumption that someone's got the formula. Um, we never want our epiphanies to feel so powerful we assume that they're the last we'll ever need. Um, this work for me started with me playing with irony. Um, it wasn't me playing with irony that started it, but I started playing with it right away and started to realize how much I am actually devoted to an ironic view of life, which is radically different, I would argue, from a cynical, hypocritical view of life. It's interesting to me that hypocrites talk out both sides of their mouth, and ironists do too. But for example, an early mantra for me was, no matter how hard I chase the truth, it will never catch me.
It will never catch
So it's like
you.
an MC.
Interesting.
It will never catch me. That is, I am both approaching and avoiding the truth. That is,
At your
I was,
peril.
yeah. So yeah, and both at my peril. That is, pursuing the truth at my peril and also avoiding it at my peril. And I'm trying to
Right.
guess which. That is, I believe dilemmas are way more fundamental than principles. The principles are at best these like antibodies trying to close an open wound that will never close from opposite sides. So you'll get opposite arguments on both sides. So you get the Stoics, and then you'll get its opposite views. I'm interested in keeping alive these tough judgment calls that all of us are dealing with and will be dealing with till the end of our lives. We're not going to resolve them. They are the tough judgment calls that come up over and over again. For example, when should I be stoically accommodating, and when should I be stoically fighting? uh you strip Stoic away and you get the serenity prayer. When should I have the serenity to accept something as unchangeable? When should I have the courage to change
Yes.
something? That's a live question. It's with me forever. I think of wisdom as recognizing that that's a dilemma I'll be dealing with forever, and therefore rolling up my sleeves and trying to accumulate the ability to notice the differences that make a difference between situations in which I should try to change things and try not to. That is, I don't assume there's any formula for this stuff. I find suspect any formula. Anytime I read something that makes people swoon, a meme from Marcus Aurelius or anything, I immediately look for counterexamples, not out of a cynical hypocrisy like, yeah, that's bullshit, everything's bullshit, nothing like that at all. But when I can find the two opposite sides of something, when I can find exceptions to what sound like lofty principles, then I have exposed the dilemma that I'm dealing with. Whereas if I just swoon over it because it sounds deep and heavy and I can ornament myself within it and be a badass, at that point, I've stunted my growth on the very dilemmas I got to deal with.
Right.
So that's fallibilism.
Add a caveat, damn it.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. Yeah, there are reversals. There are exceptions.
Yeah.
And once there are exceptions, then it ain't a hard, fast rule.
Yeah.
So that's, and there's something ironic about saying I am fundamentally anti-fundamentalist, or I am a devout uh, uh, absolute fallibilist, and that's also the point.
Right.
That is, even that rug pulls the rug out from itself. It proves that fallibilism is itself fallibilistic. It only reinforces fallibilism for me.
Right.
It's very different from saying you never can tell. It's saying you never can tell for sure, and you'll die trying. But in the meantime, try to tell.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think, like, I've been trying to sort of think about philosophies more generally, And because again, we get back to the ideology, and I'm terrified of ideology. I really am. And what I've sort of come to the semi conclusion with, I'm still wrestling with this, is that really what a philosophy should be is something to aim at. Like it's not an instruction manual. It's not like, okay, well, first of all, because the world is so complex, right? Like you
Yeah.
cannot write an instruction manual for every single thing that's going to happen in your life. This is why you need something to aim at as opposed to an instruction manual. So Stoics think, virtue is the ultimate good, which I think is a pretty general concept, right?
It
Virtue.
doesn't. Virtue is the ultimate good is vacuous.
Mm,
Virtue is by it's a tautology. I mean,
mhm.
uh, it all depends what you call virtue. It's like
Exactly.
saying good is good. That's all it
Exactly.
means. It
Yes.
doesn't actually mean anything more than that. Until you start packing out what you mean by virtue, then it starts to mean something right or wrong. But
Yeah, no, I agree 100%.
every asshole says they're virtuous.
Yeah.
Half
Yeah.
the time, the other time they say that they're hassles and they're proud of it. So,
Yeah. But no, you're exactly right. And virtue, something to aim at. But virtue in a more general way is it literally means something to aim at, or something to aim at. The Stoics would say virtue is that. And Christianity has a similar thing, right? Virtue. But you're absolutely right. It's like we need two things, something to move towards and something to try and avoid. You could also say good and evil, right? Now,
yeah,
what
but
you
yeah.
the
Go
point
ahead.
you made is excellent, because you say, okay, well, what do you mean by virtue? And the Stoics would say, okay, we mean courage, justice, wisdom, and temperance.
All
You
of
know,
which need unpacking too.
exactly. And so this is why it's so important to think of a philosophy as more of a framework. And so, like when you're trying to decide something in, say, in line with Stoicism, you have to start with, okay, is it virtuous? Then you have to start with, okay, what does being virtuous mean? And then you have to go down to the next level, and then you have to unpack it another level further, and you have to increase the complexity until you account as well as you can for the complexity of reality.
Yeah. So I don't claim or seek a philosophy. I seek
Mm-hmm.
a method. I'm into shopping for interpretations the rest of my life.
Right.
I'm not actually looking for a template that I can hold up to things. For that, I have to be paying a whole lot of attention to the difference between denotation and connotation, what a word refers to, and if it sounds hella good or hella bad. So whenever I read a meme, I am looking for connotations because they're smuggled in. Now, I do believe in good and bad. That is the origins of life research I'm about is basically about the origins of good and bad. It's a local thing. That is, I don't think there's good and bad for the universe. I don't think the universe is trying to achieve anything. That's just me, but that's my guess. Is
Right.
that it's not. But organisms sure as hell are trying to achieve something. So that's where normativity, good and bad, better and worse, kick in. And no, it's not explained by evolutionary theory. It's explained by organisms hustling on their own behalf.
Right.
So I do believe good is real, but what's good is circumstance dependent. Now, people can say, well, that makes you a moral relativist, and they could disdain me for that. But no, actually, it's a different kind of moral relativism. I'm assuming that what's good is what makes it so that we survive within reality. And while we'll debate what reality contains, I don't think we debate what the container itself is. Reality is anything that'll fuck you up if you cross it. Any opportunity that you might miss, anything, that I think is what everybody means by it, by reality. What it contains is open for question, and therefore what is good is open for question. So I would say that I abandon hope of finding a philosophy to live by. I'm only interested in how I shop among the interpretations. I want to find better ways to shop. And I assume that I'll only be honing that lifelong, and that it's a fruitful exercise in futility. A
Right.
fruitful exercise in futility. That is, I will never find the right way to shop among all interpretations. It's too much of a clusterfuck, but it is really fruitful for me to try.
But okay, so I would argue that you still have some philosophy that you're living by, even by that. It's just you've increased the level of abstraction, because the more like for example, if we get down to an
Yeah,
instruction
yeah,
manual, if you get down to an instruction manual on how to live, like a philosophy that's like, let's say the Bible,
yeah.
it's like this is exactly how you live. It's like, okay, that's like detail. That's the opposite of abstraction.
Good. Now I'm happy to go. I'm happy to go with that. So I have a philosophy But notice that there are these. I'm gonna suggest that there are three orders of magnitude on them.
Okay.
One is the formula, the philosophical formula that says always do X, never do Y. It's close to what you were talking about before.
Yep. Yes or no?
Then
Yep.
there's one degree more complicated, which is there are situations in which to do X and there are situations to do Y. So this would be like the Psalm. There's times time to sow, time to reap, that kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
Um, the third kind is really where I land, and I have no affinity. I mean, I happen to like the writings of this guy Reinhold Niebuhr, who happened to be an ironist working within the Christian tradition, but he's a guy who came up with the Serenity Prayer. I think it is the right formula for dealing with it, and it's close to precise as I can get. So yes, it's abstract, but also it's all about work. So
Mm-hmm.
it's not abstracted from effort. That is a whole
Yes.
lot of abstraction. Like mathematics is largely abstracted from effort. Computer algorithms are too. We assume that the supply of energy to a computer is reliable, and we don't pay attention to it. I have a finite amount of effort to allocate in this world. I have an overwhelm of things I would like to achieve for myself, for my community, for the world overall,
Mm-hmm.
mostly for myself, but and me and mine. But anyway, all of that to juggle, and so I am trying to make the most use of what I'm dealt, which is a finite amount of effort, which means that I have to engage in triage, which means I cannot afford to expend effort on things that won't be changeable or expend effort on things that will change by themselves. And by change, in this case, I mean improve. So
Right.
that means I'm dealing with this tough judgment call all lifelong about it's basically triage.
Yep.
I want to put it where I have leverage, not where I don't have leverage. I'm only guessing at it. I'm trying to get better at guessing. It's better bets about where to expend my effort. Yes, if you want to call that a philosophy, it is certainly you could say a perspective on life, and I would be happy to call it a philosophy. And that name, there actually is a name for it. It's fallibilism.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
what it's called. That's what it's called. So I would say I'm a fallibilist more than a Stoic. I take things from Stoicism, including trying to develop a cool eye for reality, a respect for reality. I would say that there's no higher power for me than reality itself. That is, I put no higher gods above it. Um, I do like there's a Buddhist line that I like, which is, though my heart is on fire, my eyes are cold as ashes. And I like that for acknowledging that I got all these emotional yearnings and tugs and inertias. I don't want to have to get up and do this thing. Um, but I try to keep a cool eye on the situation, and that would be also part of it.
Interesting. Yeah, I love Buddhism as well. I'm a little I need to brush up on it a little bit. But
Maybe and also I've coined the term smarma for the smarmy dharma that you get out in Buddhism a lot. I'm not it, once again, I think it's striving for there's a bit of robo-envy about it. It's got some of
yeah.
that in common.
Now what do you think is the okay, well, here's an interesting thing we can talk about. The young people today. And maybe not will include me in that group, but the younger people today, let's say the general consensus, what philosophy do you think they're living by, and do you think it's right, and where are we missing? And we spoke a little bit personally about the way that people get overly offended now, and the way that I would say even a sense of entitlement in regards to life in general. And I've certainly, like, I felt this growing up, and when I graduated university, for example, I had this huge sense of entitlement in terms of, like what job I was going to get and how the company was supposed to treat me and so on. And I contrast that with sort of the generation before me, my father's generation, which was like, if you don't work your ass off and get it, it's not going to come to you. Now, I don't necessarily think that entitlement is all bad, because you
I
could
don't
easily
either.
say, oh, you think that you can have an interracial relationship? That's entitlement. It's like, well, yeah, but that's, you should feel entitled to be free in that regard, right? So entitlement is not necessarily all bad, because there is a certain standard that we have to maintain. Now, when it comes
Yeah,
to jobs, for example, or companies, there is a certain standard. They have to treat you somewhat good. But I've certainly seen, it seems like a disproportionate jump in my generation than the previous generation in entitlement. Do you think Do you think it's too much? Do you think we're
No,
striking the
so,
balance?
yeah, so let me unpack a couple of things there because it's a perfect exercise in this. So entitlement is an interesting word. It's actually what we would call a contronym. A contronym is a word that means two opposite things.
Okay.
So dust is an example of a contronym. You can dust for fingerprints, which means applying dust, or dust a donut, but you can also dust to remove dust. There's a bunch of them. They're fascinating.
Yeah.
Think is one. Think means to wonder or to inquire, but it also means to know. Wonder is also one. But let's take entitlement. So entitlement originally meant that you have a title to do something. That is, you are entitled to
Makes
do
sense.
something. Right, of course.
Entitlement. Yeah.
Right, but it has become a pejorative as if it's a fake thing. You don't actually have an entitlement to do something, and as a result, it's also there. These two meanings are what I'd call counterspun pairs. That you can take two words, and they denote the same thing. They point to the same behavior, and one makes it sound good, and the other makes it sound bad. So opposite connotations. So, for example, I could say that I'm steadfast, or I could say that I'm pig-headed. They mean the same behavior. So this is the kind of work that I think goes into interpreting carefully and not being led around by the nose by hidden connotations on a word like it. So I try to employ the power of neutral thinking. That is, I strip it of all of those connotations to try and figure out, okay, what are we talking about here?
Right.
What are we entitled to? Now, good or bad, leave that for later. Start with analysis. Now, here's something about entitlement. All organisms are habit forming, some through evolution, some through learning. We humans are habit formers in spades. We're habit cravers too, because the world is such a clusterfuck. We like to reduce our thinking as much as possible down to habit. As I don't think my computer's I don't think my brain's a computer, my mind's a computer. I think it's in the business of making virtual computers. Anything I can handle with habit, I will. Anything I can reliably expect from the world, I will try to turn into a habit. So what is entitlement deep down? It's simply a habit of expectation.
Yes.
And not only that, the world is intrinsically unfair. That is, I can always idealize a world which is entirely unfair, but entirely fair. Let me clarify there. I can picture that, but it has never been, and there are good reasons why it won't be. Part of that is simply variation. That is, people are born with different capabilities into societies that value different capabilities. So it is, in that sense, a lottery. We try to create local fairness. That's what humanism is about. But it's got to be local because it takes effort. Remember, effort is something we have in limited supply. So we can't make the world fair everywhere. If I really want to flummox a philosopher, I pose for them philosophy's choice, which is Sophie's choice applied. That is, if the world's going to have have-nots, that is, people who are not going to have, who would you choose to be the have-nots? If you were in charge of the world, who would you be? Who would you have be the ones who are the have-nots? Because it's a way of getting beyond the grandstanding that I'm all for fairness and equality. Yeah, it's easy lip service, but once again, take it out of the abstract. It's about effort. Apparently, we don't have a world that's easily made that way, by a long shot. So as for young people, first of all, I should say, a baby boomer like me, I'm 65, has no fucking right talking to you guys about entitlement. We were the luckiest people in the world's history. We are all enjoying this party together right now, but we're leaving you guys to clean it up. And sorry about that is about all we end up saying. So no, I think that you guys have it way harder than us, in part because I would actually, and I don't mean you, I mean whatever. I'm not.
Yeah, generally speaking.
Generally speaking, younger people are going to have a harder world to deal with than the cushy world that I got into. And I happen to have a very cushy life. There's plenty of baby boomers who suffered mightily, who suffered more than some young people will. But one of the things you're going to suffer, the young people are going to suffer with, is weaning. That is, they are used to a whole lot of things that are going to be harder to come by as the future proceeds. So I'm in no place to talk about it with disdain. I hear that from um, people basically imitating their baby boomers, imitating their parents who were able to talk like that. And baby boomers who
Yeah.
do that are just unconscious of economic history, how we thrived. I mean, I got to tell you, in my generation, I was able to leave the mainstream and live on a commune for 7 years and then come out and be just fine. There were all these, no way could the younger people do that today? You have to hit the ground running if you're going to make it at all. Um, we didn't have the school debt. We didn't have all of this sort of stuff. So I'm in no position to talk about it. I do know that there is something, the prefrontal lobes don't really kick in till 25. A lot
Right.
of kids are going to be entitled. The first path that, once again, we're back to the question of whether humans are intrinsically assholes in their adolescence. Generally speaking, I think we all are.
Right.
We haven't learned to do the harder thing. We've learned to do the easier thing. We take a glossy read of Nietzsche and decide that we can be above it all on our high horse by being pan-skeptical. That is, skeptical about everything. That's very different from shopping carefully among interpretations. So yeah, I understand that impulse and why parents would treat that short phase as an indulgence. No, we were the indulgent generation, not the young folks.
Yeah. Well, when you said that, my first thought was, I suppose if you did feel like, you could lecture to the new generation, I suppose that would be a sense of entitlement, wouldn't
Oh,
it?
totally. No, that's right. That's
Yeah.
right.
And
No,
actually,
I look at young kids as celebrities. You will know
yeah.
what happened in a way I won't.
Yeah, that's scary. The fact that we have basically no privacy now, and everyone shares everything
No,
online.
yeah, I didn't mean that. I
Oh,
meant you will
okay.
see how the world turned, and we won't. That
Oh,
is, that is,
yeah.
I'll be gone in 20 years or something. You guys will still be here, or it's sooner or later, in that range. That is, and here's the other thing I should say about us. My good times are locked in. No one can take them away. I had them.
Yeah.
You didn't yet. You're still
Yeah.
making your good times. So no one can take them away from me. They're secure. Not there's what use I can make of them at this point, but I got mine.
Now, what
So,
what
so,
would that be for you though?
oh,
Exactly.
this no, oh, it, no. I mean, my life has been. I got to ride on so many different rides in life's amusement park. It's pitiful. It's just. I mean, it's overwhelming how lucky the things I got to do in this life, from being a consultant on critical thinking to the US military, to being a business consultant, to being a water project developer in Guatemala, to living on the commune, to dating a model, to dating it's more luck than most lives. Sorry, none of all of that's trivial compared to having a good guess on how life started,
Yeah.
being on a core team that got to figure that out. It's just a hypothesis, could be wrong. If you play in science, there's a good, there's
Yep.
a decent chance that you'll spend your whole life barking up the wrong tree. But to be in on a core team that's working out that question, what is will, what is the struggle for existence, uh, just blessed. No, so one way or another, to have 3 children, to have 2 beautiful grandkids, to just a whole lot in this life that I lucked out into, and it's just unluck. It's nothing more than that. To
Is
have an
there
inheritance. I had an inheritance at a young age that gave me the freedom to keep trying different things.
but is
That's
is there something, so I think luck plays a part in every success, but is there a particular crossroads in your life or an event that you can think of that like that, I don't know, is there a time you think
yeah,
when maybe things could have gone bad, maybe you could have, not have one
yeah.
road that would have just led you in completely the
Oh
opposite
no,
direction?
yeah. There were. I never got that close to rock bottom, which is also one of the senses why I have the safety to feel entitled to swing hard on my worldviews. That is, I haven't been beaten down very directly. I definitely have been punked plenty of times. Um, what I call cosmic wedgies. Um, you just suddenly pulled up short by reality not doing what you said it should.
Ouch. Yeah.
Ouch. That's right. So, but I've had them, but I've also I'd say the luck was the ability or the background that enabled me to finesse them into learning. And all of this can sound pompous at this point. I mean, who knows if plenty of people have breakthroughs that are just complete. They take them off the deep end in the wrong direction. So for me to say I learned from my mistakes, I might have learned the wrong thing from my mistakes.
Right.
I don't know. But there was a big transformation for me at about 37. Um, I was a very anxious person and not very recognizable by current standards. That is, people who knew me back then would be surprised by what became of me. And I was anxious and full of self-doubt and self-loathing, and couldn't really afford to wonder much. That is, I was drawn to Buddhism's mindfulness because I needed silence. The ruminations in my mind made me very anxious. I hated to look at who I was and who I could be in the future didn't look good, and who I was in the past didn't look good to me. I felt like I was going through a midlife crisis, is frankly what I was doing.
Yeah,
And it was the
sure.
first of a couple. The second one was when the model left me.
Oh,
You want to watch that kind of tail walking away. So
yeah.
now I had asked her to leave. I should, but anyway, but the
Yeah.
first one was similar in its own way. It was a big cosmic wedgie. And what happened to me was that I ended up lucking into the company of people um, who were trying to figure out who we are, and basically, back to cuneiform, the packing slip that we're not born with. Who are we? What is this world? I fell in with philosophers, and the question of who we are upstaged the question of who I am, what's up with me. That is, I stopped being so worried about what's up with me, and I got much more interested in what's up with us. Um, and that took on a life of its own, and 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 not to the exclusion of me. One of my favorite quotes. It relates to philosophy. It's a guy, Piet Hein. He was he's from Denmark. He's a poet who also was Neil Bohr's uh, primary ally, or uh, uh, amanuensis, which is what I kind of am with this guy Terry Deacon. He wrote, "Philosophers find their true perfection, knowing the follies of humankind by introspection."
Yes.
And I think that kind of became where I went. It wasn't to get over, it wasn't look at what's going on with these fools out there, or look at these pitiful humans, and all that from my high horse. It wasn't the view from nowhere. It was a context for my emotional life, a context for my ruminations, an understanding of why we would be exactly on schedule doing just what you would expect from a mid-sized mammal that only recently got language and is now
Right.
philosophizing.
Yeah.
It just looking at that, the kind of stuff you work on your podcast, I just find the consolations of philosophy great. And when I come down with cancer, if I do, or whatever, I don't bet the consolation is going to be much consolation. That is, I think pain is real and really convincing. It's kind of evolved to be convincing, but I do find it in the meantime the best balm I've found. It's the balm. I just to wonder who we are, to explore what this is, and not pretend like or like you found the answer already. Way premature. We just got language, man.
Yeah.
Walk before you crawl.
Yeah.
Make guesses and know that they're guesses. That's kind of where I went.
Well, philosophy is, like you said, it's where you go when you've hit rock bottom from an existential standpoint, when it's like, okay, why are we here? When you get that midlife crisis,
Yeah.
and there's this line from this book that I didn't understand at all for years, and it finally hit me a few years ago. It was from Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance.
Yeah.
Confusing book as hell. It's about a guy who, he has this bike, his motorbike, and
Yeah. I
he
remember.
repairs it. And there was this line, something I can't remember what he studied, but he said he studied something in university, and he realized shortly after he graduated that he had to go back and study the highest point, that the all encompassing thing in university, and he said that was philosophy. he said that is the mother. That is where everything else in life branches off. And I've been really tormented by that idea for the past few years. It's been tormenting me because it's literally what happened to me. And I had no idea what he meant by that when I read it, but I did an engineering degree and got out, and I have a great job. I love my job, and I've created I think a pretty good life for myself. But what happened was I got intellectually bored. And what happened was is I really got deep into philosophy because for me it was like what is more all encompassing than that? I
Yeah.
don't know if there's anything else.
Yeah. Um, here's something I noticed about philosophy a couple of weeks ago, actually. Philosophy, originates as love of wisdom. So
Right.
Sophia is wisdom and philos is love. Um, all the other fields are ologies. So biology is the study of biology. Um, now, so to me, it's interesting that it's not. I think it's just a frozen accident that philosophy is called philosophy. What would I actually call it? I would call it sophology, right?
Sophology.
It's the study of wisdom.
Right.
That is, any damn fool can say he loves wisdom, and most do. It doesn't. If we don't know what wisdom is, then claiming to love it is actually a dangerous business. I've noticed that. Um,
Right.
Actually, and you probably noticed this too. That is, you could talk about seeking money. You can talk about seeking status. You can talk about seeking uh, uh, game, partners and all that. Um, and people understand and acknowledge it. If you say that you're out seeking wisdom, it's a little taboo. People will take a step back from you. It's a
Yeah.
little hinky. And I think that's partly because wisdom, anybody can claim that they're into wisdom, that they love wisdom. Um, so I actually think what we're talking about is sophology. And what do I mean by wisdom? I mean, here we are struggling with and against reality.
Yes.
Reality supplies us all of the fuel we need by which to do our work, but our work is actually in defiance of that, of natural tendencies. The natural tendency is for things like us to fall apart. That is, while we're alive, we are hustling, we are using basically the second law of thermodynamics against itself. We are burning up resources to maintain ourselves. We're the first thing giving the universe any run for its money. That is, the universe is slowly dissipating, entropy is increasing, and we are in the business of not of locally regenerating our own order.
Right.
So wisdom is for me. I don't go to the philosophers for my origins story. I go to science for that. That is, you could say that what I'm interested in is scientific answers to philosophical questions.
Mm-hmm.
I read a fair amount of philosophy. I find that it tends to be very abstracted from work. That is, it's
Yes.
gone the way, that is, they're not paying. There's these abstract concepts and they move them around and they're kind of vague about the difference between cause and effect and means to ends. And they can make these models and there's a diversity of models in philosophy. I have friends who are grad students of philosophy now and just describe how they're basically different sub silos within it. If I want to understand wisdom, I go to the origins of life, struggle
Mm.
for existence,
Yeah.
and adaptations as the very first approximations of wisdom. And then I work out this whole phase through which, we end up with language and how that increases and decreases our wisdom. We are way more visionary than any other species and way more delusional. We're just
Mm-hmm.
fascinating that way. And for that, I'm just lucky to be a language user, because we're some of the only ones who can look around the universe and try and figure out what we are in, what the
Mm-hmm.
whole universe is. So scientific approaches to sophological, I've never said this word before, sophological questions, that's what interests me. And yes, it's very much what you're talking about from the art of motorcycle maintenance. It's what I buy from philosophy is its questions
Right.
more than its methodology and its answers and its assumptions. That is, Here's an example. So much philosophy it deals at the level of humans. They're as if humans are emotions and cognition only. Um, the whole free will determinism debate ignores what will is. Will doesn't start with humans. It starts with the will to live, the struggle for existence.
Yes.
So you got these people talking on either side. One side denies it and says you're just chemical mechanism. And the other side assumes will and argues that it's completely liberated or something like that. What the fuck is it? So if you want to figure it out, start with the origins and figure out how, that way you'll know what it is from its, from how it emerges from chemistry. So that's where a lot of my work is that's what I've been working on with this guy, Terence Deacon, who was working on the origins of language and then turned to the question of the origins of means to ends behavior, origins of trying. Basically, what is trying and how did it start? So that's where I went from there.
I think that's a great spot to end.
All right, man.
No, that was a great conversation. I really enjoyed that. I gotta say, I think when you it's kind of frustrating sometimes. I shouldn't say frustrating. It's very complicated talking with a fellow philosopher because we always go into the caveats, right? And it kind of spirals out of control, really simple. And but no, that was a great conversation.
I'm glad, and I can be overwhelming. I like
no.
Yeah.
No, anyway. No. I just mean it's like it's just great. It's honestly great. Like I love having these conversations going, and it's your perspective is just amazing because from an evolutionary perspective and from an origins of life perspective, and that last part there where you tied in philosophy and science, like that's true. It's so true because they shouldn't be at odds with each other. If
they aren't at core, they aren't. One last thing, just to mention it, people mistake science for empiricism. But science, it's not empiricism. It's shopping for interpretations worth testing.
Right. Yeah.
So it's really actually natural philosophy. That's natural philosophy recognize both sides of it. So I will sometimes be pretentious enough to say I'm not a scientist, I'm not a philosopher. I'm into natural philosophy. And basically I think of the game as you're trying to find natural explanations for all natural phenomena. You don't get to say, well, there's a magical something that does it. That's the campaign. That's what we're trying to do. Natural explanations for all natural phenomena.
Absolutely.
Who knows if we'll get there, but we'll figure it out.
We're gonna try.
We're gonna try.
Where can people find you?
Oh, they can find me at jeremysherman.com.
Yeah.
We'll bring you to a page that shows you all. There's all my media stuff up there and all of my 8 questions that I work on. Yeah. And then other than that, if you Google Jeremy Sherman, you'll get way too much of me.
It's very good. Thanks again.
Pleasure to meet you. Pleasure to hang with you, my friend. I hope we stay in touch.
Will do. Bye, everyone.
All right. You take care.